Hello, this is George from George's Music Blog, and today I am talking about some of my favourite electronic albums of 2026 so far. So continue watching if you want to hear about some big-hearted techno, murky ambient, psychedelic droning dub, sugary breakbeat rave, and much more besides. Remember, these are just some of my favourite releases from the last few months. They're not close to being a representative selection of all electronic music. As always, please let me know your thoughts and your favourite releases of the year so far in the comments. So, with that out of the way, let's get into it. Nathan Fake, Evaporator. Okay, I think I've managed to avoid using this term on the channel so far, but I think we might be into Dadtronica territory here. Nathan Fake came to fame in the early 2000s with his track The Sky Was Pink, which was remixed by James Holden and became a staple of his DJ sets. Drowning in a Sea of Love was one of the first albums on Holden's Border Community label, which I guess became a locus for a certain style of electronica, very much taken up the mantle of Aphex Twin, Clark, Autechre and Boards of Canada, in particular the crisp, crunchy beats and a certain kind of synth sound, somewhere between hazy nostalgia, a la Boards, and a sort of post-millennial club music. Anyway, I never massively followed Nathan Fake's output, to be honest, but I found myself listening to his 2023 album Crystal Vision a lot that year. Evaporator is an extension of that sound, which actually started with the album prior to Crystal Vision, which was Blizzard's, released in 2020. The album art for each of these records does the music justice pretty well, to be honest. Very shiny, clean lines, iridescent colour shades. The music has quite a live feel to it as well. I think Fake is a bit of a gearhead, so I expect he has a setup whereby he can lay down a good chunk of his tracks in real time, and the music just has that kind of feel to it, to be honest. So yeah, basically, if you're into robotic industrial beats of 90s Autechre, before they went off the deep end, programming-wise, and the hazy analog synths of Boards of Canada, then you're going to feel right at home on tracks like Iwa by Ali Stock or You'll Find a Way. I say Dadtronica because this will appeal to people, let's be honest, usually men, of a certain age whose tastes were shaped by this kind of music growing up and want something just edgy enough to feel hip but familiar enough to stick on while working from home. Clark himself does feature on Orbiting Meadows, which is actually just a 2-minute sort of bridging kind of track of ghostly synth and treated piano. No beats really, which seems like a bit of a waste of having Clark, but whatevs. There's a few cuts which are a little bit more striking. Hypercube leads with a more frenzied synth line and a tempo that sounds like it wants to go places. Again, I don't know how much of this piece was improvised, but it doesn't truly deliver on the kind of high stakes opening, instead fizzling out into distorted fuzz. Much more satisfying is the album's climax, Slow Yamaha. I don't know if this is a reference to the legendary Yamaha GX1, a synth used by Keith Emerson, Stevie Wonder, and of course one of Fake's heroes, Aphex Twin. I don't know nearly enough about synths to be able to identify the sounds, and Yamaha do produce a lot of them. Please let me know in the comments if you can ID the synth. Anyway, it is a fizzy, wobbly 9-minute epic of a track, and the last third sees the introduction of a lovely, drony, robotic sort of synth sound, similar to the one used in Carl Craig's remix of Falling Up by Theo Parrish, if you know that one. In fact, it might be the same kind of synth used on The Sky Was Pink. Anyway, really lovely way to round out the album. Placid Angles, Canada. Placid Angles is the alias of techno legend John Beltran. Yes, I think it's probably fair to use the L word regarding John Beltran. He's released a trove of albums under his own name, as well as numerous side projects and collaborations on some iconic labels. R&S Records, Peace Frog, Delsin, Transmat, etc. He's perhaps best known for his '96 record, 10 Days of Blue, a landmark in melodic ambient techno ideal for home listening, but that by no means defines his sound. Placid Angles is actually a very old alias, responsible for his first ever release, Aquatic, in 1991. However, he'd all but retired the name until he was encouraged to reactivate it by British producer Lone. another artist responsible for some beautifully nostalgic and melodic rave music, and who I'll also be covering in this video. I chewed through the Placid Angles section of Beltran's discography prior to this one coming out, and listening to albums such as First Blue Sky, released on Lone's Magic Wire label, and Touch the Earth, it is clear how much he has been influenced by Beltran. This enduring love for Beltran's sound seems to have helped encourage him to keep the project alive, with this latest record dedicated to, yeah, you guessed it, Canada. In keeping with previous Placid Angles albums, and most of Beltran's material, Canada is big on melody, atmosphere and emotion. Big-hearted techno, you could say. I Want What I Want features singer-songwriter Sophie Estelle, providing dreamy, murmured vocals, and something you don't necessarily expect from a techno track, the Amen break. Pitched down and bathed in reverb, with Stell's warm and murmured vocals, the effect is richly comforting and nostalgic, but with a very pleasing rhythmic heft. Hero incorporates a break from the Burial track, Near Dark. I assumed Burial had sampled it from somewhere himself, but some cursory research suggests not, and Beltran is just straight up sampling an original break from Burial. If so, that's a nice nod from one producer to another. Canada, the title track and the true centerpiece of the record, gives strong X-Tal vibes with its booming bass drum, gossamer synth textures and wordless vocal sample. It's a glorious, symphonic and celebratory piece of music that sounds like nothing more than simply a celebration of all that is beautiful in the world. There's a lovely little acid line at the end as well, as a cheeky little sting in the tail. The dreamy atmospheres, buoyed by a jostling breakbeat and prominent flute on Sun, make it practically an homage to Lone, kind of like paying back a homage, really, given, as I said, how much of an influence Beltran was on Lone. So yeah, in summary, Canada is simply a very lovely record. Beltran sometimes treads a line that goes quite close to cheesiness, but here he absolutely pulls it off. If you want something nostalgic, joyous, lush, and just very pretty, look no further. Anthony Child, Of the Beginning. We now have a chance to use our wonderful technology to help us find again some of those things which our metaphysical climate has taken away from us. That is a quote from Humphrey Osmond, the British psychiatrist who first coined the term psychedelic and led groundbreaking research in the 1950s using LSD to treat alcohol addiction. We'll come back to Humphrey Osmond shortly. Anthony Child is best known by his principal recording alias Surgeon, under which he's released a great many albums and is recognised as one of the leading figures in UK techno. In recent years, his sound has been characterised by the use of modular synthesis and more of a live approach to recording tracks, laying down elements and applying effects in real time. If anything, this has made his music even more raw and more urgent, taking it back to the ethos under which he began, and of course heavily influenced by the original pioneers of Detroit techno. His releases under his own name, which I have to admit I'm not so familiar with, have tended to be more experimental and ambient, incorporating field recordings and live performances. Of the Beginning came out in December last year, so apologies, it's not strictly an album from 2026, but I think it merits attention, so I'm going to talk about it. It is ambient in the broadest sense. There's certainly no beats here to speak of, but it is also full of movement. Ambient to me often implies stillness or restfulness, whereas Of the Beginning is a choppy listening experience full of uncertainty and sensations of shift. In the material accompanying the release, Child states, 2025 was a difficult year for all of us. For me, it was one of loss, breakdown, heartbreak, reflection and discovery. So, loss, breakdown and heartbreak, it's clear he's obviously been through some really tough times, and that also explains the deeply somber and reflective nature of the music. First track, Waking from the Dream, begins with a simple arpeggio but dissolves into a waxing and waning sense of constantly seesawing back and forth as notes come in at odd intervals and discordant with one another. This choppiness and queasiness induces a strong sense of uncertainty, so that entering the dream would probably be a more apt title. By the end of the 9 minutes, some kind of resolution has been reached, but definitely not the sense of clarity you might expect from the title. That pretty much sets the tone for the rest of the album. Are You Being Served is equally tense and shifting and might put you in mind of some of the more ambiguous and unsettling portions of Selected Ambient Works Volume 2. Outside spans almost 15 minutes, a choppy jam of roiling clouds of static and showers of modular synth. Reminds me a lot of the beautifully downbeat and overcast soundscapes summoned up on old school hardware by Echoplex. Check out his album Reflections for more of that kind of sound. There is some respite from the gloomy mood. Shipwrecked has a more optimistic emotional aspect and a much more linear construction, comprising layers of frictionless drones that reach ever upwards, rather than the endless sense of plunging back and forth that seems to pervade the rest of the album. One other thing to mention for anyone interested in this kind of thing, Child lists the gear used to create the record: MIDI Cake ARP, Roland SH-01A, Buchla 200, Waldorf Blofeld and Torso S-4 and OTO BIM. Plus he lists the emotions used to make the album: grief, despair, gratitude, hope and love. Probably tells you as much as you need to know, really. So maybe I can tie this back to Humphrey Osmond as promised. Here's a further quote from Anthony Child. Music is my refuge, a safe place to bare my soul and try my best to examine my feelings about what it is to be human in this world. Beautifully strange. And I suppose that fundamentally is what Osmond was also engaged in, to understand what it is to be human in this beautifully strange world. Lone, Hyperphantasia. Lone is one of my favourite producers of the last 10 years, I guess, is how long I've been listening to his music. Though he has been releasing music much longer than that. 2012's Galaxy Garden was definitely one of the defining electronic albums of the 2010s, I would say. Hyperphantasia is his 8th album, but his first in 5 years, so he's been quiet for a little while, to the point where I was worrying we might not be hearing from Lone again. But thankfully he's back and on top form. If you've not heard his music before, then I would describe it as taking the best elements of rave, breakbeats, the energy, the dayglow colours, and swirling that round in a bath of nostalgia and psychedelia to create a deliciously fizzy Technicolor cocktail. There is also a healthy dose of trip hop in there, or there has been over the years, and a strong influence of 90s video game music. Not an intentional influence, apparently, according to Lone, but so much time spent playing those games. He was a Mega Drive kid, apparently. It inevitably filters through as a kind of default background music, I guess. For Hyperphantasia, Matt Cutler, for that is his real name, set himself the challenge of bringing all his influences together to recreate the album he could hear in his mind. Thus, Hyperphantasia is a kind of internal fantasy land, a utopian rave where the music never stops and the vibes never run sour. A beautiful iridescent bubble that holds a rainbow of styles, an homage to the glory years of rave. But unlike so many who attempt to pull off the same feat, Lone never relies solely on nostalgia as his party trick. Even for an artist with a maximal aesthetic, generally disposed to working in lurid Technicolor, Hyperphantasia paints a particularly vivid picture. Matt Cutler's own description: like taking every style I've worked with, amping them up to 11 and firing them off a cliff, sums it up pretty aptly, to be honest. Taking a more circumspect view, one could see this as a bit of a career retrospective, a breathless tour through the influences that have coloured Lone's style over 2 decades. Rave, breakbeat, hip-hop, house, ambient and progressive, but always united by that slight sense of fantasy, as if this was rave music from an alternative dimension, a hidden bonus level of the kind one feels one could unlock after an especially loved up night of raving. Highly recommended, and you can read my full review in the description below. Rod Modell, Frequencies in the Fog. Rod Modell is perhaps best known for his deep chord alias, which used to consist of a duo of him and Mike Schirmer, but for many years has been Modell's solo project and probably fair to say the most long-standing successor to the classic basic channel sound of deep, stripped-down dub techno. Modell himself is described by Discogs as a sound designer, which I guess is fair, and in recent years his music as deep chord seems to make more and more use of field recordings, which adds richness and a depth and layer of organic warmth to his cavernous excursions in bass and rhythm. I'm not so familiar with his output under his own name. The deep chord discography alone has enough to keep you busy for dozens of hours, and he has dozens more albums as Rod Modell. But today we're talking about two releases, Frequencies in the Fog and Grotto of the Sun. I'm not sure if you'd call them albums. Each one consists of two parts of 20 minutes each, so 40 minutes on each release. There's certainly more than an album's worth of music on offer. Much like deep chord, these pieces are guided by susurrations and rustles of static and warm enveloping bass. But gone are the relentless chugging rhythms in favour of a languid, drifting sense of motion. We're talking a fully ambient blend of field recordings, very often the sound of trickling water, which again adds its own sense of fluid motion that just kind of carries you along in a warm, squidgy bubble. It's very pleasant and soothing. The water trickles and the big pillowy synths are giving me quite a strong new age vibe. Very much the kind of thing I can imagine playing in the background in a massage parlour, to the extent that these might feel a little too cosy for those used to his grittier dub techno releases. I can't really claim to have any insight on whether these are the best places to start in the Rod Modell catalogue, but they are definitely worth checking out if you want an immersive, relaxing sound bath. Vladislav Delay, In a Lawless World, there it is, strength in numbers. Okay, this one actually came out right at the end of 2025, I think 31st of December to be honest. So sorry, again, not officially a 2026 release, but I think it's fair to include it. Vladislav Delay is otherwise known as Sasu Rapati and is much respected for his experiments in ambient, minimal and glitch. I believe he was initially known for being a proponent of the kind of clicks and cuts sound put out by the Mill Plateau label in the early noughties. He's also a jazz drummer by training, and very often present in his sound is a strong improvisational kind of free-flowing movement, as if he's not fully in control, but rather the conductor at the head of a set of machines or algorithms which are figuring out his commands and partly making it up themselves as they go along. There's also a strong dub feel in the bass, although more the kind of minimal dub techno rather than anything you might skank to. In a Lawless World, there is strength in numbers, interesting sentiment, and presumably a statement on the current geopolitical environment, but that's as many clues as you're going to get, as the music itself is completely abstract and austere and devoid of any kind of cultural signifiers or human sounds. I guess I'd describe this as minimal, kind of glitchy dub. The album art too is suitably minimal, consisting of a background of grey static, and the 5 track titles are all effectively the same, Lawless World, each with a slightly different suffix in brackets, numbers, num, number, etc. Much of Delay's music has that quality, where on the surface it can sound very repetitive, but at the same time, as I said, having a free-flowing, improvisational or almost aleatory quality, unfolding in a random or chaotic way. The first track utilises the same short chord sequence or series of notes over 9 minutes, but this is gradually degraded and submerged in static, glitch and enveloping clouds of dubby bass and analog synth wash. The very same sequence then reappears on the following track, but this time with a slightly more consistent kick drum buried behind it. Rather than anything progressive or linear though, you get the sense this is all just Delay experimenting with a few tightly defined parameters and seeing what permutations he can wring from the setup. If you like the fuzzy analog sound palette of classic basic channel style dub techno, as well as the glitchy, staticky aesthetic of Mill Plateau and the myriad of artists surrounding that scene, then you should find something to enjoy here. James Welsh, Filaments. James Welsh was not an artist known to me prior to this year, although he has, it seems, recorded music and found fame under various aliases, and can count Errol Alkan as a fan, on whose fantasy sound label Filaments was released. On the face of it, Filaments is a fairly unassuming record in the mould of classic 90s intelligent dance music. Broken beats, melodic touches that are by turns melancholy and mournful as much as they are redemptive and embracing. A magpie approach to genres with a pronounced techno influence. in the propulsive rhythms and industrial sounds, as well as incursions of distortion and noise, sometimes wrought by the least IDM instrument of all, the electric guitar. All this would be decent enough, but what particularly defines Filaments are the tragic circumstances behind it, namely the death of Welsh's 1-year-old son Rory from leukemia in 2016. That is an unfathomable loss to comprehend, and it feels like no creative expression, whether music, art, poetry, literature, whatever, could come close to conveying the weight of what it must be like to go through that. And I hope I'm doing justice to Welsh's creative process to say that Filaments isn't necessarily an attempt to do that. Rather, it's a reaction to grief. These tracks are the sound of someone processing incredible loss and in some cases finding out what's on the other side. Thus, we get the searing something red, a distorted wall of synth blast that could be a cry of pain, of release, of catharsis, or just a sensation of tearing oneself out of bed and up to face another day. The wall of sound kind of reminds me of early Verve or some 90s space rock shoegaze before this massive Chemical Brothers style breakbeat comes in, giving the track an epic rhythmic wallop. Mechanism is pure grinding guitar noise, and again feels like a massive release of tension when you've screamed and cried and there's nothing left to give. The sound itself builds itself around you, enveloping you and swaddling you. A65 is a lean electro banger led by an absolute perler of a riff. I assumed A65 was the name of the synth, but it is actually a main road in the north of England. These different styles and genres ought to sound incongruous, but they really don't. Welsh somehow manages to tie them all together with his production style, which is very much in keeping with the proud lineage of Yorkshire electronic music. Accompanying the album is a stunning short film by award-winning director Kieran Evans, featuring scenes of the rugged and beautiful landscape of Welsh's native North Yorkshire. A lone figure sometimes populates these landscapes with eyes clenched shut, seemingly frozen in time, trying to comprehend their loss, while around them the world continues through the same emotions that it always does. Rivers flowing, birds flying, clouds moving across the sky. It brings a whole new dimension to the music on Filaments, which I won't do justice trying to describe. So yeah, a deeply moving but also subtle and restrained piece of work, forged in one of the deepest imaginable wells of human experience. Nondi. Okay, next up is a new release on Planet Mu by Nondi. Nondi being the alias of producer Tatiana Triplin from Johnstown, Pennsylvania, also known as Flood City, which lent its name to her 2023 album, Flood City Tracks, also on Planet Mu. I can't remember how this artist came onto my radar, I guess because she is on Planet Mu. And I suppose to give it a succinct description, you could call this abstract footwork. I remember a press release years ago that described Actress as R&B concrete. And this is really closer to the experimental sounds of Actress than something a DJ would drop to energize a dance floor. So I guess you could refine that description to footwork concrete. There are some clubby rhythms here, but it's like they've been handcrafted by someone who's never been to a nightclub. The whole production has this very corroded texture like rust or water damage, and there's a ton of crackly distortion in the mix, which is a sound I find very appealing. The melodic approach is very hazy and very nostalgic, so yeah, definitely something to put you in mind of Boards of Canada if the Sanderson brothers had grown up in Pennsylvania rather than Scotland. The DIY bedroom ethos also reminds me a little bit of early Black Moth Super Rainbow, especially that sunny acoustic guitar that opens the first track just hanging out. Not so much in the aesthetic, as BMSR tends to be very rainbow coloured and psychedelic, but just the approach feels very kind of homespun. Sound of someone with limited equipment and production technology, but using that to their advantage to create a highly distinctive and idiosyncratic sound. Some tracks are giving me kind of early noughties glitch hop vibes. Was it glitch hop? Electronica, the stuff that Scam Records were putting out with that kind of time, with very crunchy beats and electro synths. You hear it as well in the kind of impressionist approach to rhythm, loops and beats almost applied as kind of background texture rather than acting as the propulsive energy of the track. As an exception to that, the beat on Broken Future 175 is pretty straight up drum and bass fare, albeit heavily distorted, but the melancholy synth sits in beautiful contrast. So again, it sounds like D&B, but made by someone whose only access to the music was a batch of sun-damaged VHS tapes of Ronnie Size. There's a sample which features twice on the album, something to the effect of, "Without our leadership, the corporations are powerless." In the first instance, it sounds like a snatch of a news broadcast, glimpsed as you switch between different content feeds. Later, it reappears pitched down and bathed in a translucent synth, and sounding very much like a relic unearthed from a great calamity, an artifact in a post-diluvian world when sea level rises have turned everywhere into Flood City. So yeah, overall, a very distinctive and engaging album, definitely an artist to watch. Shackleton, Euphoria Bound. In summary, I'd say you want to file this under drone-heavy psychedelic dub, or dubstep. Shackleton, known as a pioneer in the dubstep genre, and probably one of the most unusual and distinctive producers to emerge from that scene. His music has been pretty far from what many would consider dubstep for quite a long time. If you like a more in-depth review of Euphoria Bound, then check out my video on that, linked in the description below. Working with a hugely varied selection of collaborators, from jazz clarinetists to spoken word performers to cabaret singers, Shackleton has constantly evolved his sound, taking it further into the realms of the transcendent, ritualistic and psychedelic. While those descriptions definitely apply to Euphoria Bound, it is also his most immediate and urgent sounding album that I've heard, at least. Instantly recognisable as Shackleton, sure. The unusual time signatures, tonal percussion, tectonic bass, and drones that shimmer in and out of focus like hazy after images. But it drops you straight into the action and doesn't really let up over 9 tracks. A seething, roiling mass buoyed along by constantly churning and relentless and restless rhythms. Right from the get-go, Elemental Dream drops you into the deep end with cascading drum rolls, chopped vocal snippets, a ghostly choir and Eastern instruments conjuring up the scene of a Middle Eastern souk. Fragments from such far-flung locations swirl around with interplays of bass and percussion that pull you back to more nocturnal UK surrounds. The result being a dense and intoxicating mixture, droning, trippy, pulsating, and massively psychedelic. Okay, that's it from me. There's quite a few more releases I would have liked to cover, some of which will feature in the next one of these videos. But what did you think of these albums? What have I missed? What releases coming out in 2026 are you excited about? Please let me know in the comments, and please give the video a like if you've stuck with me this far. And until next time, thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.